Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Super Coach Mates All Australian 2024 live stream. So welcome everyone watching us live on YouTube. Tonight I am joined by Thomas, and we are going to be watching the All Australian team as it's revealed, and giving our thoughts and opinions on it. So how are you going, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Should be definitely an interesting night for sure. We obviously will closer to when they actually announce the side. We'll go through our side and what we've put together. Obviously posted what we put together on Twitter a little bit ago. I think it was like 2 weeks ago when we actually did it. So yeah, it'd be definitely interesting to see kind of who makes it, who doesn't. We'll discuss kind of a few players who've been tough, had a bit of a tough luck with regards to being even selected in the squad. There was definitely a few eyeball raisers there, but it'll be definitely interesting to see who makes the cut for sure. Considering there was a few interesting names already thrown into the squad of 44, but I have a feeling based off the names already there, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a pretty stock standard side coming up. What are your thoughts on the initial 44 squad that was revealed, Nate?
Look, I think there's always surprises and a few eyebrows raised every year. I think it's more so the players who perhaps were unlucky to miss out. But I think overall, I think I was pretty. There are no real big surprises in terms of who was actually named.
Yeah,
I think it was more so who actually missed out. There was more the talking point, which is probably the only problem with having 44 players. Is that there's always going to be a few unlucky players who miss out, who perhaps may have deserved a place in the squad, or perhaps even the final 22 or 23. So yeah, it's always an interesting, I guess, time of the year when the selectors finally reveal the squad.
yeah.
But yeah, as I said, yeah, few eyebrows raised. I have no doubt we'll touch on them throughout the night. Some of the players who perhaps we were a bit surprised who missed out, and perhaps there might be the odd one who we thought perhaps was a bit surprised, or perhaps
Yeah.
came from an unlikely spot and managed to get their way in. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, there's always that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Um, we'll move on to, I guess, top five players. These are in no real particular order, obviously, who did not make the cut even into the 44. There's a few standouts there, obviously, too, from my boys there, which we'll talk in a little bit more detail. But yeah, Roe Marshall was the big one that I think social media literally blew up on with regards to him not being selected at all. Considering he had a pretty consistent season, we'll make it a direct correlation with Darcy Cameron in a minute. To see what the case was there. Second one being Flanders. I mean, super coach wise has been insane. Dropped under 100 once, which is pretty impressive. But yeah, it's one of those things where you obviously look from a super coach perspective and see, well, does it actually correlate to AFL consistency? Obviously, all Australians are looking for a consistent season rather than super coach wise being scoring hundreds in super coach. Yeah. Tracy, third on the list. I think he's one that, yeah, scored 45 goals this season. He's a big indicator of, or big factor why the Hawks did so well. Sorry, not Hawks. Freo did so well this season to come so close to finals. And Tom Green, not Toby Green there. Tom Green and Cal Wilkie round out the top five. I think Green was a bit underrated from a perspective of not necessarily a super coach, but from the perspective of actually, you know, being a contested bull in that midfield, and a big reason why they kind of swung it around in season 2024. And Cal Wilkie from my boys, frustrated to see he wasn't on that list. I think he probably had a worse season than he did last year when he did make the accolades. Um, I think he probably deserves a lot more recognition than he gets, but it's hard with key defenders. I guess when he was named as an All-Australian fullback, he's pretty much a back pocket or a tall back pocket. It's frustrating, but yeah, 2.4 intercept marks on average in the season. Or intercept marks, sorry, that was only 0.4 I read on Fox Footy from his All-Australian year. So Yeah, it's one of those things that it swings around about. Obviously, it's an accolade that it's more of a midfielder's game at the end of the day, and that is said to be the Brownlow. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, about those 5 exclusions in particular? And is anyone else that raised eyebrows for you personally that you thought deserved a spot at least in the squad?
Yeah, well, for those of you who have watched a podcast before, you will know that I am a stats lover. I listened to Full On Footy with Daniel Hoyne on Tuesday night. And he went through Champion Data's own All Australian team, which is purely based off data. So there's no personal bias towards any particular players. And they actually had Sam Flanders in their side on the bench. So I think out of the players who've missed, I think he's probably the one perhaps biggest surprise for mine was Sam Flanders. Um, Rowan Marshall, I could very strongly make a case for him to be in there. I feel like it was probably between him and Darcy Cameron, to be honest, in the squad.
Yeah,
I don't think either of them are going to make the final 22 anyway. Um, but yeah, I think Marshall probably, perhaps my Collingwood bias might come out here, but Darcy Cameron, I feel like is probably going to be top 2 or top 3 in our Copeland Trophy this year. I think he had a fantastic year. Whether or not it was enough to beat Marshall, I think Lee Montagna went through the stats on the midweek rub on Triple M yesterday. And I
yeah,
think basically Rowan Marshall has him covered in every stat except for intercept marks. So perhaps on those alone, you could perhaps say that Darcy Cameron's probably quite lucky to get in ahead of Rowan Marshall. But then I guess that's perhaps the factor of playing for, I don't want to sound nasty here, but perhaps playing for a bigger club that you get noticed more than perhaps one of the smaller clubs like St Kilda is.
yeah,
And also, I feel like the fact that Collingwood were sort of around the mark for most of the year, and other than a probably 4-week block after their bye in the first 3 weeks of the year, actually were one of the better sides in the league. Perhaps that weighed in as well.
yeah,
As for Josh Tracy, again, I feel like probably injuries have probably played their part in this decision. But again, you've just basically got to draw the line of, well, how many key forwards realistically are going to get in the squad? You would probably only say at most probably 3. And you'd think that that Jesse Hogan and Jeremy Cameron would have 2 of those.
yeah,
So it's basically a matter of, who's the third forward if they decide to go down that path. I think Kerno was in there, and Joe Danaher and Harry Mackay as well, who I probably think all had better years than what Josh Tracy did. So yeah, I'm not as surprised he missed out. Tom Green, um, he didn't really have as much impact, I felt like, as he did last year, which perhaps is a bit of a reason why he got omitted from the final 44. I think last year is the leading disposal winner in the game last year, but he was nowhere near that this year. And as for Culwickie, I'll probably refer back to Josh Tracy again. There's probably only going to be 2 or 3 key defenders who end up making the squad. So, um, I think we're going to get surprised tonight when I don't have Jacob Wiedering in my side.
yeah,
But I think going up against Andrews and Wiedering and Sam Collins, I'm just trying to see if there's any more key defenders. No, so there's no more key defenders. So, I mean, they probably could have perhaps fitted him in.
yeah,
But again, it's just a factor of weighing up who has to come out from that squad to make way for Wilkie. So yeah, as I said, the only one I was really surprised at was Flanders not making
Yeah.
the cut at all. But the other four, I could make a case and probably say that they're probably more, a case of there were probably better options who were clearly more suitable for this year across the year. But Flanders again, yeah, Flanders was the one I was surprised at just having a look at that. But yeah, they're my sort of thoughts and whatnot on the snubs or the players who missed out.
Yeah, I think Flanders, I guess it's probably more of a testament to the consistency where other players have shown it across an extended period of time, and I think that's what they like to look at from an All-Australian perspective. It's not just a one season hit, because obviously Flanders has really only stepped up this season, but I think his consistency has kind of been overlooked a little bit. I've got the broadcast on my iPad. I've seen Dacos won the, unless it's a top three, but I'm pretty sure Dacos has won it for the AFL Associations Award. Mistake me if I'm wrong, Nath, but I'm 90% sure that's what they're showing on the footage right now.
I haven't even got it on. I'm actually not going
I
to
think,
watch
yeah,
it.
AFL coach. No, you're right. You're right. It is. It's AFL Coaches Association Award, Nick Dacos. So, yeah, he's won. That is
He did
definitely.
well. At least he's won something tonight. He might win another award later. Oh no, I don't think that actually gets announced. I think they don't do goal of the year or mark of the year anymore. I think they do that on Brownlow night, don't they now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they do. Oh, it's a bit surprising as well. I don't know. It's one of those things where I guess Dacos is sometimes underrated in a sense when the Pies get smashed and you kind of overlook how well he's done. But it's definitely interesting. I'm a little bit surprised that likes of Cripps and Bontempelli in particular, who made finals, um, both being captains of their side, haven't won it over him. But I guess it's probably an accolade that Dacos is underrated in and shows how good he is of a second year player. That's for sure. Well, third year player.
And can I just butt in as well there? The AFL Coaches Association Award is arguably more prestigious than the Brownlow because the Brownlow always throws up some anomalies and the umpires, safe to say, do have their favourites.
Yeah,
Whereas the coaches normally are completely unbiased. And normally they get their scores pretty accurate with each other. There's sometimes a bit of an odd, odd discrepancy, but for the most part, normally, for those of you who don't know, basically the coaches go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The both coaches for the game do that, and most of the time they marry up. But there are the odd occasions where there are perhaps some differences here and there. But
yeah,
that's why I think the players really value that award because it's basically their own peer network or their own coaches who are giving them that award on behalf of all the coaches. But unfortunately, it normally doesn't translate into Brownlow's success. So it will be interesting to see how Nick Dacos votes on Brownlow night. But yes, obviously third year now. So yeah, he's
yeah.
just going to be a fantastic watch for the next 10 years for all the Collingwood supporters out there.
100%. No, I agree. I've just seen that Hogan's been announced as a gold medalist. I mean, we all knew that. He's probably had a very impressive season. Kind of resurrected his season, to be honest, with how up and down he is and how he's flipped between like the D's and Dockers and whatnot. He's kind of solidified himself as one of the best key forwards going around at the Giants, and it probably helps that you've got a midfield stacked brim to the talent with the likes of Green, Kelly, Canelio, all that sort of talent running through the midfield definitely helps his case. But I guess moving on, whilst Hogan's doing his acceptance speech, to the top 5 All Oz surprises. Again, these are no particular order. I'll let you, Nath, go in a bit more detail on each one. Darcy Cameron, if you just look at the stats there in itself, it'd be interesting to see your opinion in the reason why he was taken ahead of someone like Marshall. Just looking at them from head-to-head perspective, it's not like Collingwood made finals as well. Cam Rayner's probably a little bit surprising with regards to him getting in as well, considering he hasn't really been a standout in any kind of categories for the Lions. Sam Collins, I guess, argument can be made. He's hasn't been a real standout. I guess he's been consistent, but no more than a lot of other key defenders. Nick Blakey seems like they're going off a lot of his early form in comparison to his later form. And Hayden Young is a bit of a surprise, I think, in my opinion, whilst he kind of stormed home quite strongly. And that was evident in his Supercoach kind of side. I think, early season form definitely didn't highlight that at all. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, on those five in particular, and maybe give a bit of an insight specifically maybe into Cameron and kind of his season to date, considering you've watched him a fair bit?
Yeah, well, I did touch on Darcy Cameron when I was doing him with Rowan Marshall. I feel like they were probably tossing up between him and Marshall, to be perfectly honest with you. I really can't give a justification as to why they picked Cameron, other than perhaps because he's at the bigger side. Again, it shouldn't get factored in, but as we know, they don't base the All-Australian side necessarily off stats. There is the reputation that comes with it. So perhaps if they're going to do a comparison between Marshall and Cameron, maybe they just felt that Cameron was perhaps a little bit more reputable. He won the premiership last year with Collingwood, and he really did play well for the majority of the year. Again, not discrediting what Marshall did, but perhaps that's why they went Cameron. Rayner, I'm not as surprised with you about Cam Rayner, purely because I know that once Brisbane started getting on their winning streak, he was actually their most impactful player. So he was their number one rated player across like an average of an 8-week period. So I'm not as surprised about you that Rayner got in. Perhaps this is a spot where Flanders perhaps could have got in. But look, I feel like Rayner, at the end of the day, he probably didn't deserve it, but I'm not as surprised. Sam Collins, again, another one I'm not surprised at. I think he was the number one rated key defender for most of the season. I'm pretty sure he made the Champion Data All-Australian team as well. Sam Collins. Yes, he did. So he was the number one rated key defender for the year. So I'm
Right.
not surprised he made it purely for that reason. Nick Blakey, again, data driven. Nick Blakey was the number one flanker this year, according to Champion Data. So again, I'm not surprised that he made it, but yes, I definitely do agree with you there. I think there is a lot of that early season factor that played into it, because I think at one stage in the 4-week block, I think he was outside the top 20 or 30 players in the AFL. And he's basically been a top 10 player for the last, 2 or 3 years with this Champion Data player rating system. So for him to be outside the top 30, just showed how much he dropped away, because I think he was basically in the top 5 or 6 for most of the first half of the year when I was listening in. And then Hayden Young also made the Champion Data All-Australian team, but he purely made it based off what he did once he went into the midfield. Because I know when he went into the midfield, he was ranked well outside the top 50 players. And then as soon as Fremantle moved him into the midfield, he worked his way up. And I think last time I heard, which I think was about round 20, I'm pretty sure he was a top 5 player on Champion Data's player rating system. So he probably was the opposite to Blakey in that perhaps his late season form
Yeah.
has helped him get into the squad when he basically flew home. But yeah, the one that I was perhaps most surprised with out of that was the Rayner one, even though I could justify it. But at the same time, I feel like Flanders was probably more deserving of it than Rayner. But the other four, I can have a perfect case for them making it. And yeah, that's
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. I guess it's one of those things that I don't know. I think your Collingwood bias
I will
aside,
say you are always
yeah.
going to have players who miss out, who
Oh yeah,
perhaps
100%.
fan bases say may have made it, which I think's the thing with Ryan Marshall here too. I think a lot of St Kilda fans were perhaps put off that he missed out. But then a lot of Collingwood fans who've watched Darcy Cameron week in, week out might go that, yeah, he probably deserved it. Don't think he'll make the final 22, but he deserved it. So there's always that sort of situation as well with these
Yeah.
omissions and surprises.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think it's obviously depend on the club that you support for and who you watch on a week to week basis. You can interchange a fair few of those players. It's just yeah, you look at Freo, for example, who had four players in the squad. So you got Sarong, Brayshaw, Young, and there was one more. It was, give me 2 minutes, 2 seconds. It was Luke Ryan as well. So, you look at that and there's four players in there. Geelong had three players, and then the two teams that missed out were the Crows and the Tigers. Tigers understandable considering how poor of a season they've had and the rebuilding phase they're in. But you look at Adelaide, for example. Perhaps a little bit surprising. Someone like Rankin didn't make the cut. So yeah, obviously it swings and roundabouts. But I guess you could debate for years on how important some of those players are to their sides and how lucky and unlucky some of those players have been in the respective slots for the 44 All Australian team. But I guess moving on, whilst we await the starting of the announcement of the 22, just to let you guys update and to let you know that I believe it's been Harley Reid that's selected as the Young Player of the Year. Most courageous, I think, was given to Zach Butters, so he's won that in consecutive years now. And Marcus
Is that Best
Bontempelli,
Young Player Award? No, that was
yes,
Harry Sheasel.
was it?
Harry Sheasel, yep, got the Coaches Association's Best Young Player Award.
Oh no, no. Wasn't it? I'm pretty sure it was Reid that was just announced a minute ago, wasn't it?
Well, I'm on the blog here and it's saying that Harry Sheasel got it.
Is that last year?
No, this year.
Because no, the Australia Best First Year Player Award, AFL Player Association, Harley Reid. That's the AFL posting.
No, that's Players Association. Okay.
Oh right,
No,
yeah,
that's the Coaches Association.
yeah. And then AFL Player Association, most courageous, Zach Butters. He's won that twice in a row, as I said. MVP, AFL Players Association, Marcus Bontempelli. I wouldn't be surprised if this bloke goes and wins a Brownlow. He's probably been deserving of it for a couple of years now. And I know Rod, who posted in the chat beforehand, because it seems like a dog supporter as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets his Brownlow medal that he's been so deserving of for a while. And I think that's correlating with how well the Dogs have gone in the last month of footy. But I guess moving on before we hit all Australian territory with regards to announcing the actual side, we're just starting the ball rolling with a bit of trade talk with what's been happening the last kind of week, or not week even, probably the last 48 hours realistically. We'll probably go into more detail when the coming weeks kind of arise, post-finals and everything with regards to trades, who's moving, who's going, what is it kind of confirmed picks. There's been three that I'm aware of at the moment that have been pretty much confirmed with regards to the player wanting to leave to a specific club, and that's Battle, Barras and Rioli. We'll start off with Barras. Oh, not Barras. Josh Battle here, Nath. I'll put my bias aside for a minute, being a St Kilda supporter. It came out this afternoon wanting to move from St Kilda to Hawthorn. What are your thoughts on this trade in particular? Who does it benefit the most? So is it a win to St Kilda? Is it a win to Hawthorn? And what do you think, like obviously with regards the trades, we were talking first round or a second round pick, depending on the actual band that Battle falls into with regards to his salary. What are your thoughts on this trade and who wins the most out of this one?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting trade because I feel like a lot of this is based off what Hawthorn have actually done this year. Um, so I think the winner of this trade is going to depend on how much actually is um being put on the table for him in terms of a contract. I think 950K is a massive risk for him. But I think St Kilda will laugh all the way to the bank if that's the case, because that would probably trigger an early first round pick, or the first pick after St Kilda's normal pick that they have. So I think this is going to depend on where the contract sits. I think St Kilda will be hoping that it's band one,
Yeah,
and that it's an early first round pick or a mid at the worst. But otherwise, I don't know what St Kilda's salary cap space is, but if they feel like they can match this offer and they feel like that they can perhaps get better compensation through a trade, if they have the cap space, I wouldn't be surprised if St Kilda went out and matched this, because I think they really need early picks to sort of regen up midfield,
yeah,
which is probably the weak spot for them. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that if St Kilda feel like it's not going to be a first round pick, that they actually match the offer and make Hawthorn trade with them for a first round pick. But normally that never happens. So at this stage, it'd be hard to argue that St Kilda have won. So
yeah,
I think it's a win for Hawthorn at this stage, because they know that they're getting a player who's already developed,
yeah,
who's entering the prime of his career. But I think if St Kilda get a first round pick for him, I think they will say that they've probably broken even with that. And
yeah,
perhaps if they get an early first round pick, they might even say that, well, when there's no way we're going to pay him 950 grand a year. So we'll just take the early first round pick and say we've won that and move on. So at this stage, I would say Hawthorn, but again, it's going to depend on where the final contract is and what compensation St Kilda get.
yeah. No, 100% agree. I think, yeah, it really depends on uh, what kind of band it triggers with regards to which compensation. Is it a first round pick? Is it a late first round pick? Where does it actually sit in regards to that? I think, I was a guest on the Saints TV Teams podcast for the last couple of weeks, and it was obviously an interesting conversation we had with the other guys on that one, with regards to whether Battle goes or whether he stays. And I mentioned on that one, I do think that I've always thought Battle would leave. I think the writing was on the wall with regards to him leaving. He had that weird request where he wanted to run out with his daughter, and obviously the AFL declined it. That probably kind of left the writing on the wall with regards to him leaving the club. It almost felt like he was wanting it to be like a farewell game kind of vibe. It's clear he's got obviously feelings for the club, that he wasn't like a walkout situation. It's obviously probably money talks in this scenario the most, and he's going to a club which probably suits him the best. I've always thought, and we'll talk about the next player in a minute with regards to Barras, that I felt that when Barras wanted to go to Hawthorn, it probably made Battle's choice even easier because he plays the exact same role that he did in St Kilda, so it's not like his role deviates so much. With Barras still in the side, I think Barras takes that number one defensive spot, which Hawthorn have been crying out for. They're getting a ridiculously good defender as well. In Barras, and Battle plays that third role with Sicily perfectly. So their backline is set for another 10 years, really. But it'd be interesting to see what we do with this Battle pick. Obviously, I'm not as probably bullish as some other supporters in the fact that it's the be all and end all, and we're fucked without him. But I think the biggest thing is that he came to the club and as a forward, as a really no clear identity until Ross Lyon took the helm, and since Ross Lyon come in, he's been able to really figure out his identity as a third tall, and Ross Lyons trained that in him and obviously coached him to that success. So I think knowing that he probably can do that with the other players in our list and probably filled that role quite effectively with the likes of McLennan coming through the side. Shoalmakers is the one that seems to be a direct like for like correlation with it. So it's an interesting one at that. And I think we'll talk about this when we release our trades podcast later down the track. But Dan Houston's another one that has been heavily linked with St Kilda in the last kind of 48 hours, who seems to be a pretty good replacement for someone like Battle. So obviously not the same role, of course. We lose a lot of height with him, and probably another not a lockdown defender, but a player that can play key defender-ish. But yeah, it really will play out in the next coming weeks about what compensation we receive for him. But I guess moving on to the other piece of the puzzle for the Hawks, which they're in a really good position if they can win a final as well, come Friday, to really rubber stamp their credentials as not a team that have been lucky and have played just amazing footy for the past month, but really kind of showed the AFL that they have rebuilt really, really quickly. And Sam Mitchell's an excellent coach, probably the coach of the season, to be what it's like coming from 0-5 to where they are now into finals. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, on Barras? And I have a feeling you're going to say the Hawks win this one again. Is there any scenario where obviously Eagles will get compensated to some degree, but is there any scenario where Eagles win this trade?
Well, I should just point out, I don't believe this is a free agency trade. I believe this is going to be a normal trade, because I'm pretty sure he's still in contract at West Coast. So Hawthorn are going to probably have to stump up at least one first-round pick. I think West Coast would be wanting 2. So I guess the fine line with Hawthorn is they're probably going to have a pick outside the top 10. And I'm not sure if that pick outside the top 10 alone is going to satisfy West Coast to let him go. So I think they're probably going to have to get a little bit creative, Hawthorn, with what they do with regards to that with regards to that pick and how they can satisfy West Coast with that. I think this deal will get done. I think Barras wants to leave. I think he wanted to leave last year and head to Sydney, and it didn't happen. So he definitely wants out of West Coast. So yeah, I mean, if Hawthorn can land Battle and Barras, well, I think that's going to make James Sicily a very, very interesting proposition for Supercoach next year.
Yeah.
Because I think he probably got hurt a lot this year by having to play taller than perhaps what he did. But if Battle and Barras can come in and take those 2 key posts, then perhaps he could even play like a Tom Stewart role at Hawthorn, which is what I think Sam Mitchell envisions him doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Sicily really rose after that. So yeah, again, at this stage, Hawthorn, I'm going to say Hawthorn are going to win because I guess the one thing with draft picks is you never know who you're going to pick up. You might pick up a complete dud. But Hawthorn are getting a ready-made player. They know what they're getting. So at this stage, Hawthorn, I would say, are going to win that. The only way I could see West Coast winning is if they can get a top 5 pick for him. Or if they could somehow get 2 first-round picks, perhaps Hawthorn's, a top 10 pick this year and Hawthorn's future first next year. But otherwise, I think Hawthorn will try and just get him with the 1 first-round pick and take him all the way to the bank, and that'll be that.
Yeah, no, 100%. The Hawks are looking at a very tasty proposition next year for sure. Before we move on to kind of our last confirmed trade out, or as in the player wants out, essentially, I just wanted to break off on a little tangent here. We obviously know final start next week, and we'll do an in-depth kind of preview analysis on all 4 games, including the Hawks Dogs one, of course. But what are your thoughts, Nathan, quickly on this one. We obviously looked at the Hawks, and we'll go into a lot more detail with them next week. But do you think they're a genuine contender, or is it kind of a one hit wonder, or do you think they'll almost regress next year and it's almost been a one hit kind of month of footy they've really dominated in?
Well, I think it's hard to say regress, because I actually thought Collingwood would regress at the start of 2023, and we ended up winning the premiership. So, I don't think they're going to regress. I think Sam Mitchell's too um, driven to allow that to happen. But I guess the one difference between Collingwood and Hawthorn where they sit is that Collingwood were a much older and more mature squad than Hawthorn. And I think the last thing that these young kids at Hawthorn would want to do is perhaps get ahead of themselves, and just think that it's going to happen because it's happened this year. So there is that element to it, but the way Hawthorn are playing right now is very, very frightening. And as I touched on the podcast we did on Monday, I'm actually really disappointed that probably the two best and most informed sides in the comp are actually going head to head this week in an elimination final. And we're going to have to say goodbye to one of them,
Yeah,
because I genuinely think that both of these sides outside of Sydney, I think they might have the best chance of going all the way, even though they're starting outside the top four. And I think it's a shame that one of them has to leave at the end of next Friday night. So if it's Hawthorn, I would say it's been an outstanding year for Hawthorn. They'll come back next year with perhaps some more weapons down back.
yeah,
But yeah, I feel like that they can do damage in September. I don't know if they can. I don't know if they can quite make the grand final. I don't know if they're ready for that step. But the way that they're playing definitely suggests that they can probably get there.
yeah,
But again, even if they get through this week and next week, if it's Geelong, they're going to have to go to Sydney, and I think that might just be a bridge too far for them.
yeah,
But either way, they've had an outstanding year. Um, all credit to Sam Mitchell. I thought that they were in wooden spoon contention when they were 0-5, but he's done a remarkable job to turn this side around, and to get them into the 8, with the best form line since I think they've actually had the best form line since round 5. So to do that's just a remarkable job. And yeah, I can't wait for Friday night, next Friday, because it's going to be an absolute belter of a game.
yeah. No, 100% agree. I think yeah, it's sold out. I mean, me and Nath tried to get tickets and we both failed. So it'll be one of those games which I think, with how attacking both sides are, it's going to make for a really hot contest. And I think as well, what was I going to say? It's one of those things where you look at Hawthorn's list profile, and I'll compare it to St Kilda, obviously making that final back in 2020. We regressed since then because of kind of a not disillusion, kind of, I would say disillusion kind of statement from the board, thinking that we were ready for a grand final to help me kind of top up with a few old players and trying to get the list right. But you look at Hawthorn, they don't have to worry about draft picks. Even if they do bomb out of the first week of finals, I think it's a really good experience for those young players, and they've got a really young list in general. But I really think that two players, and we'll talk about this next week, that are going to be putting them in good stead is the likes of Bruce and Gunston. They both played in multiple grand finals. They know what it takes to play in a winning grand final. So they'll probably instill a whole heap of confidence, those young boys, going into Friday night, where they're up against the Dogs, who could almost do what they did in 2016 and come from the clouds to win a grand final, with how confident that playing group is playing right now. And Bobo's fixed a few things, which has definitely been real helpful for them moving into the finals week. But moving on to our last player of note, Dan Rioli, like obviously Richmond's team has fallen apart a little bit since the start of this year. Like we lost Dusty, we lost Grimes, they lost Grimes in retirement. Then you've got news that Liam Baker wants out, Shai Bolton wants out. Rioli was the one that confirmed it was all kind of writing the stars for him. We'd go to the Suns. Who do you think win this trade? Is there any semblance that Richmond can win this trade based off how important Rioli has been for them?
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be the same discussion as Barris. But unfortunately for Tigers fans, this is just what happens when you're successful. Is that these things happen? That you basically get to a point where you tip over, and you tip over really, really quickly. So yeah. As for the winner, well, it'd be hard to argue against again the Gold Coast Suns winning this trade, because they know what they're getting. But for Richmond, I think they will have some consolation in that they can really attack this draft hard. And this is probably going to be one of the last drafts where perhaps this is going to be possible, because with the introduction of Tasmania, and perhaps a 20th team in the not too distant future after that, just so there's no buys, that perhaps the next few years of the draft are going to be heavily compromised to basically set Tasmania up like the Suns and the Greater Western Sydney Giants had, 10 or 15 years ago now. So perhaps for Richmond, they might view this as, look, let's just get rid of anyone who doesn't want to be there. They've been great success. They will have lifelong memories at Richmond, but they do need a reset. So I think for Richmond, they will perhaps ask for a first round pick, an early first round pick. I don't think he's worth that.
Yeah,
But if Richmond can get even a mid first round pick out of the Suns for him, I think that's a great result for Richmond. And it allows them to basically work on going back to the draft, and doing what they need to do, which is to regen that list. And as for the Suns, well, again, they know what they're getting with Rioli, so he might. I mean, they say that one player can change a club. I don't know if Rioli's that
no,
type of player, but he definitely will be an important player in that half back line
yeah,
going forward for the Suns. So I would say this is probably more of a win-win than the two Hawthorn trades, just purely based on the fact of where Richmond are at.
yeah,
That they need the draft picks to regen. So perhaps for Richmond and Rioli, it's better that they just split now and have a fresh start. And Richmond can get what they want, which is the draft picks, and Rioli
yeah,
can get what he wants, which is another chance at another premiership. So I feel like this trade, um, at this stage, it'd probably be a win for the Suns.
yeah,
Just again purely based off they know what they're getting. But I think Richmond will consider this and say, that the draft picks are more important than keeping the players at the minute, because we're at that stage of our list.
yeah.
That perhaps they might not mind it so much. So, yeah, that's sort of my take on that trade.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. I think it's one of those things where, yeah, I think you nailed it on the head with regards to Rioli not being one of those players that is going to change Gold Coast from missing out on finals to being a finals lock in for the next 10 years. I think he's one that's almost like a cream of the crop player that adds flair and dash off halfback. I think he's going to really suit the Gold Coast Suns with how he plays. Obviously, was molded greatly by Dima Harwick to play that halfback role. But I think the Tigers just really need to set up shop again from ground zero. It almost seems. I really do feel for Adam Hughes a little bit, with essentially half the list walking out at the end of this year, and they don't really have much backup with regards to talent ready made players coming in the door. They've got Lynch, who is not Yeah, I mean, as a save, can be the saviour at times for the Tigers, but I think with the players leaving as well is going to really hurt him moving forward for the kind of forward entries that come through for him as well. But Rioli, I think as you said, there's probably a 50-50 with regards to the success for the club in what they get in return, or more in particular what Richmond get in return in comparison to the Suns. But the Suns, I think, really need to capitalise next year if they want to stay relevant at all in the competition as well, because I think they're also been there for a while. They've been handed gift package after gift package from the AFL, so they bloody better make the most of it, because it's frustrating as an opposition supporter sitting there watching them get basically free candy from the AFL to try and set up an AFL side. But that's for another day. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think we'll probably have to wait a little bit to see who wins that trade on paper based off the picks that Richmond get from him. But before, hopefully, I think they've just announced their Rising Star Award, and that would Ollie Dempsey. I'm surprised that Darcy Wilson actually wasn't top three. I think Kai Loma was third, so that probably shows how well respected he's been in
Well,
the
if
AFL doors.
if I can just touch on that, that is a compromised award this year. Because the two
Oh,
best
Harley Reid.
the two best players weren't even eligible for it.
Yeah,
I will put the caveat on that. Well done to Dempsey, for winning it. I don't think it's any surprise
Harley Reid
since
left.
Reid and Sam Darcy both got suspended.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think everyone who watched this year knew that Reid and Darcy were clearly the two best young players of the season.
yeah,
But because they were ineligible to win it, Dempsey's sort of been helped out with that regard. So I'm not taking away from what Dempsey did. He had an outstanding year,
yeah,
and deserving winner. But I just feel like that this year, the best young player didn't win the award, which was Harley Reid, and then Sam Darcy was a clear second. But yeah, as I said, well done to Ollie Dempsey. But yeah, I feel like the best young player, unfortunately, and the second one were ineligible. And Ollie Dempsey took full advantage of that. So,
yeah.
yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation to have. You look at the Brownlow medal, and it's the best and fairest player of the AFL, full stop. Whereas you look at the Rising Stars, should we really be looking at a best and fairest as well in that regards, or should we take suspensions out of it altogether? Because we're looking at the talent itself from a Rising Star perspective of the best young player going around. I guess that comes into the same contentions with the Brownlow. So yeah, I agree with you. It's compromised as well, but definitely a conversation moving forward whether they should start to kind of rehash it so they avoid suspensions. Does that change things as well? I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter these awards because it does to some degree, but you look at it 10 years later, no one's actually discussing who won the Rising Star Award. It's more who's made an impact in their career across the longevity period rather than an impact player just on their first year. But I guess that's what the AFL look at in regards to the best and fairest player. I think they want to look at it holistically. I'm hoping that the All Australian team starts to get announced soon. I believe they just is it usually after the Rising Star Award they usually give it to?
I
I'm pretty
believe they normally.
sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's that long.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming that was the last award handing out. They've gone through a fair few. But before we head over to our All Australian team, just want your quick thoughts on a few players. We'll keep this rapid fire because as I said, more information filters through on nominations of clubs and all that. What are your thoughts on these three? I want to get your thoughts on these three, Nath. Number one being Dan Houston, wanting to go back to Melbourne. Where does he go? I know St Kilda's been tied to him, and it seems increasingly more noise around that, considering battles now left, so we've got space opening up. Yeah, Houston being number one. Number two, Petrarca. We've all heard his horrific injury that he copped against you boys. Does he go to you guys, or does he go to Carlton, or does he go to a smaller AFL club? He's come out and said stuff like he doesn't want to play for a small club. You take that with what you will, but what are your thoughts on that one? And also Clayton Oliver, also from Melbourne. What are your thoughts on him? does he think? Do you reckon he stays? Do you reckon he waits until some other trades are made to make his decision, or do you think it's best for him to start elsewhere? What's your kind of rapid fire thoughts on those three?
Well, can we just talk about the Melbourne too? So the one player you didn't touch on there was I heard some breaking news come out. I think it was maybe yesterday that Cozzy
Yeah.
Pickett's also
Oh
homesick
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
And perhaps he's looking to go back home to South Australia. So
yeah. Well,
let's just start with the pardon.
WA or South
No,
Australia?
I think he's South Australia. I think he's South
Oh,
Australia.
let me
Cozzy
double
Pickett.
check.
Well, that's what I
Yeah.
heard. I heard he was South Australia. But anyway, moving on. There's
No,
something
it's
horribly.
WA.
Is he
WA.
okay? Well,
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
There's something horribly wrong at that club. When you can have your two best midfielders and your best forward,
Yeah.
say that they want out of the club,
Yeah.
when they're all three of them are still in contract. So there's something horribly wrong at Melbourne. Um, I'll just leave the Melbourne one there. Going back to the first one with Dan Houston, I think the Dan Houston one is an interesting one. I think he is happy to go back to Port Adelaide if they can't get a deal done for him. But he would like to come home. I feel like St Kilda probably would be a good fit for him, given that you're losing battle or that they're losing battle. So there is that obvious connection there with the club who sort of needs him. But I feel like all the Victorian clubs who have the capacity to go after him will.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of him choosing which one he would like to go to. But going back, Petrarca to Collingwood. Look, I would love to see him at Collingwood. I think obviously, if you get one of the best players in the AFL wanting to come to your club, you sort of take that on board. But the likelihood of that happening is basically next to nothing, because even if he wanted out, he's still in contract. And also, Collingwood don't have the draft capital to be able to satisfy Melbourne. So it would have to involve a player, and we don't really have any player who Melbourne would need, because the one position they need is a key forward, to help Van Rooyen out, and we don't have one of them.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's going to be the stumbling block. Although I did read that um, it's never been done before, but apparently, if a player is that desperate to get out and the club are refusing to budge, they can go to the AFL, who can mediate, who can essentially be a mediator between the player and the club.
Mm.
It's never been done before. I would be surprised if it got to that point. I feel like this is a thing that can just be dealt with by, a conversation. But it is very, very troubling when you've got Petrarca and your other best midfielder in Oliver who both want to leave.
Yeah.
The Oliver one is an interesting one. I feel like that one is more likely to happen than the Petrarca one. And that's still a long shot of happening. So, I think for Oliver and Petrarca, I think it's unfortunately a case of that they're just got to deal with it, because otherwise, yeah, they're going to be just basically moping around the club. But then I guess I guess it's another problem then for the club as well, because it's sort of the problem of, well, do you really want to keep players who don't want to be there,
Yeah.
which might end up damaging them more. So it's just amazing that 3 years ago this club were on their way to winning a premiership in Perth. They were far and away the best centre bounce side. They had the best defensive system in the AFL. It was near unbeatable. And now 3 years later, the place is falling apart. and three of their best, probably six players want to leave the club. So there's something that's horribly gone wrong there. And yeah, so they're sort of my takes on those trades potentially happening or not happening.
Yeah, no, 100%. You would have just probably seen me whilst you were talking, updating our graphic with regards to the actual Australian team. I didn't realise the screen was still on. But if you look at our team, oh, where is it? I don't know what we had. I think I've just lost it anyway.
No, that's
Let me
what
just.
we had. That's what
Oh,
we had there.
I've started. Oh no, I had saw what we had. What am I talking about? Yeah. So we had Luke Ryan, Harris Andrews, Lockie Whitfield, Dane Zorko, Jeremy McGovern, Harry Sheasel. Have you actually seen it yet? Because I've got the broadcast live.
Nope,
Uh,
I do not know who's in it. I have zero idea. I have got you on one screen and I've got Football Manager on the other screen.
Full manager. That's hilarious. Well, Luke Ryan, we nailed. That was a tick. So he's been announced as a halfback, back pocket on the back pocket. We were
Good.
not right on Harris Andrews. It was Jacob Wiedering. So Jacob Wiedering's the All-Australian fullback. The other back pocket was Nick Blakey, which I'm surprised personally. I guess he was. We talked about him earlier. Halfback
We
flank.
did.
So
He was one of those ones who I think we sort of had on the cusp, but we just didn't quite fit him in.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where I personally was surprised he even made the squad. I don't think he over impressed me so much, but I guess if you probably look more internally to how well Sydney have gone, he's a big reason why they've done so well with his mad dash off halfback. But yeah, he was there. One Dane Zorko and McGovern both in. With no surprises there. Harry Sheasel didn't make the cut for the defenders. I don't know if he's eligible as a midfielder, but he could be. Dan Houston was the one that was the other halfback, which doesn't surprise me as well. Probably wouldn't be surprised with a lot of clubs now circling around him, a lot of Melbourne clubs in particular, because they've had damaging years. We obviously showed how well he could become based off his potential and how well he has played for Port. I guess Adelaide clubs or clubs outside Melbourne sometimes are a bit not as highly under the microscope when it comes to AFL circles. But yeah, Houston finished off that defense. Any surprises there, Nathan, with the guys that are not on our list? Obviously, Houston swapping out for Sheasel essentially, and Whitfield swapping out for Blakey, and Wiedering out for Andrews for that matter.
Oh, no, I'm not surprised at any of them. I think they were the three positions where we sort of watching back on the live stream. I think those three were the Andrews, Whitfield, and Sheasel were the ones we probably had the most discussion about where to put them.
Yeah,
I think I do remember you flagging Wiedering as one, and I think I talked you into Harris Andrews.
Harris Andrews, yeah.
So again, we were sort of on the nail there with Wiedering. I think we made a case for Houston as well, but I think we just felt like Sheasel had perhaps a more damaging year than Houston. So perhaps that's one of those ones where perhaps they've looked at
Yeah,
Sheasel and said perhaps he's in a poor side, and he's quite young as well. But his time will come. I have no doubt his time will come. So, Houston, no real surprise. And Blakey, as we touched on, I think Blakey probably didn't deserve it, but perhaps because of how well Sydney went, he got in. So, yeah, I feel like Ryan Andrews, no, Ryan Zorko and McGovern, we pretty much had those three. I think we were in total agreement with those three. So, yeah,
yeah.
I'm glad we got half the back line right.
Yeah, nice. Whilst the players are getting interviews individually before we move on to the midfield and the rest of the squad, I know before they announced the defenders, they announced the three umpires as all Australian umpires. Obviously, they should be recognised for the job they do, and it's nice to see specific umpires getting recognised for their hard work across the 2024 season. Do you think that, obviously, it's a controversial topic in regards to respecting umpires and all that, but do you think they actually should be presented as with all Australian jackets, considering they are like I mean, I guess some people might say it's old school thinking, but at the crux of it, they're umpires, they're not players.
Well, yes, I feel like they should because the umpires, there's no AFL without the umpires. So I feel like they've got to be recognised somehow.
Yeah,
And I feel like that it probably isn't the same as an all Australian player, but I feel like you've got to recognise the umpires and the dedication that they have, the passion that they have for the game, knowing that week in week out they cop a lot of abuse, which
yeah,
is one of, I guess, the unfortunate parts of being an umpire, and it does generate plenty of discussion about some of the decisions they make. But at the end of the day, they're only human. So they are a big part of the AFL and what makes the game what it is.
yeah,
Look, I'm all for recognising the umpires, however we can, because they definitely do need more recognition because it's such a hard job
yeah,
for them to umpire. So, um, yeah, I'm all for it.
yeah. Nah, fair enough. What are your also thoughts? I don't know if you watched the St Kilda Carlton game. I know we're going a little bit off topic here, but I'm still waiting on these midfielders to be announced. What are your thoughts on what was I say? That Carlton game, the fan that pegged the bottle. Obviously there is a zero tolerance on umpire behaviour. What are your thoughts on what he obviously got criminally charged? Do you reckon it's rightly deserved? Do you reckon it's too harsh? I mean, I obviously think I know what you're going to say here, but what are your thoughts on that? And kind of the behaviour shown towards umpires. How do you think that is the case? Do you reckon it's always been this bad with regards to umpire abuse and stuff like that, or do you actually think that it's kind of been exacerbated by the amount of rule changes that we've had and the inconsistencies and the kind of pressure put on umpires to get results, to get decisions correct when there's so many changes going on from year to year basis that no umpire in their right mind could even get these rules consistently underpacked in such short, pressure situations.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna say that if that was a soccer match, the game would have been stopped and the crowd would have been entirely removed from the stadium, and the rest of the match would have been played behind closed doors. So the fact
Yeah,
that we're not at that stage yet is a good thing. But if idiots like that are gonna keep going to the game, and deciding to take their own anger out on another person, well, um, perhaps that's something the AFL are going to look at, um, because we can't have that in any sport. It's not, the umpires are just there doing their job. They're not the ones who are deciding the rules. It's their job to basically adjudicate to the rules that they're given. And the fact that the goal umpire was the one who copped it, even though the goal umpire had absolutely nothing to do with it, I think says a lot about that fan who decided to throw the bottle in the first place. So what I would also highlight is the fact that I'm pretty sure that the Carlton cheer squad is a ticketed area. So the
yeah,
fact that someone who's not in the cheer squad was able to get into that bay, that close to the umpire anyway,
yeah,
perhaps is a bit of a red flag for the security protocols in the first place. That the ticket people who stand in the aisles have just let someone who hasn't got a ticket walk down into I would say the
yeah,
most
yeah,
fan active area that we've got in the AFL,
yeah,
and do that. So yes, I'm glad that that person has been criminally charged. That fan deserves a life ban, should never be allowed at any AFL venue again. And we move on and hope that it doesn't happen again.
yeah,
Um, because I think everyone at that stadium was very, very lucky that that was not a soccer game.
yeah,
Because if that was a soccer game, the match, as I said, the match would have been stopped. All the players would have gone off. all the fans would have been kicked out, and the rest of the match would have been played behind closed doors, basically like the first round of 2020 with COVID. So that's not where we want to be in the AFL. We want the fans there. So yes, I'm glad that they got caught up, they got charged, and now hopefully we can move on from it. But yes, the umpires haven't been helped by all these rule changes. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, nah, I think there is a zero tolerance, and as you said, we only have to look at that Melbourne Victory City game where, not obviously something similar. I mean, pretty much something similar did happen, but it wasn't targeted towards the umpires, and it was kind of an external issue going on. But yeah, as soon as the crowd got involved, they canned it straight away. And 100%, I think you are nailed on the head. When there is that umpire thing, soccer would probably take in their own hands and do that as a result. So hopefully, for AFL's sake, we don't see that kind of behavior come through in the final series, because I think it'd be a disaster if something happened and we had to can it and fans had to go outside and play the rest of the game outside closed doors. But just moving on to the All Australian, back to the All Australian side. So the midfield's been announced. We actually got all of it correct, except not in the specific order. Obviously, Nathan, I'm assuming you haven't seen it yet. Do you want to take your guesses about who's been swapped out and in of that side? So we had Errol Gordon, Bontempelli, Zach Merritt on the wings. Followers were Gorn, Cripps, Neil. Who are your thoughts on who was swapped
So
in?
it was those 6, was it?
No, not all. We got it most of them. I think one of them, I have a feeling, will be announced, but not now. So Cripps gone. I just have to see this again. Cripps gone in the correct positions. Neil wasn't. Bontempelli was. Gordon wasn't. Merritt wasn't. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Wait, so Merritt and Gordon weren't,
Nah.
but they swapped onto the other wings?
No. As in they haven't been named at all. So whether they get named in the forward line or the
Oh,
interchange.
Gordon wasn't even named.
No, not on wing.
Right, so who's on the wing then?
So Dacos on one wing. I didn't
Nick?
quite catch. Yeah, Nick Dacos on one wing. I think we obviously list him on the interchange bench. I don't know who was listed on the other wing. I have to double check that when it comes through. But Cripps was named as a follower. Bont was in the middle. Sarong was the person that we had, or that was listed instead of Neil. So we had Neil. They've gone Sarong. So we had Sarong on the interchange bench. So Neil could for all money, be on the interchange bench as well. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that one?
Oh, I'm surprised that Gordon hasn't been named on the wing, because it's probably going to be hard to justify him actually getting a spot in the side now. I think that's probably. Pardon?
Sorry to butt you in, Nath. Gordon's been named on a wing. He was the first player off the cap. So scrap what you just said, because he's the
Oh,
first
right,
one.
okay.
Merritt
Right.
was the one that was for Dacos. Sorry.
So who's on the wing? So it's Gordon, Bond,
Yeah.
and Dacos, is it?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So, yeah, no real surprises there. As much as I would have loved to have seen Massimo D'Ambrosio get named, I just don't think it was realistic for him to get named. Obviously, I'm glad that Nick Dacos has made the field for the second year in a row now and not the bench. He did probably play a little bit more forward. Not really a wingman. But sometimes they do that where they don't do that. Where they don't pick two natural wingmen. But I guess this year can be justified because there was probably one clear standout wingman. I know that stats will say there's two. There was Gordon, and then a bit of a gap, and then D'Ambrosio, and then a massive gap down to the third one. But it was interesting that Champion Data actually didn't have Nick Dacos in their side at all. But he was the next player to come into the side. So he, I think, was what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think he was the 6th or 7th best midfielder for the year.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not surprised that he made it. And as for Sarong, well, we nailed that. We just didn't have him on in the followers. Um, so we'll take that. So I think that was 6 from 6, wasn't it? Oh no, we don't know about merit yet. So 5 from 6, not a bad get out of that.
No, I think we'd nail it especially if Merrick and Neil get listed on the bench. Moving on, before we hear from the forwards, I believe it's the half forwards next or the half forward line. What are your thoughts on every year? They basically do this religiously. This is the first year probably that you look at Goulden and Dacos in particular, that Goulden's almost been a true winger to some regards. Like, obviously, he's played centre bounces, but majoritively wing. Dacos, not so much, but probably could play wing in a realistic side. What are your thoughts on, and we'll probably see this more in the half forward line per se, where they're not picking true half forwards. It's more midfielders thrown forward to fill the midfield quota. What are your thoughts on the All Australian selectors picking midfield and forward spots? Do you reckon it should be a traditionalist setup where you have to pick players that have played a certain percentage in that position? So, for example, if you a small forward, for example, in a forward pocket, has to have played in that position for, say, 70% or more. They're not putting a Zach Butters in there for a forward pocket. Or do you think we should be just gifting players, or sorry, rewarding players for their effort and picking our best 22 based on talent alone or how well they've done for the season?
Yeah, well, because the game has changed so much since the first All Australian sides got announced, it's actually really hard to pin down players into positions these days. So someone like, for example, Callum Mills. I'll just use Callum Mills as an example. Now I know he only played, I don't know how many games it was, 5 or 6, but he was basically a three-way split between the midfield, the forward line, and the back line. In that he's basically spent 33% of his game time in all three positions. So how do you justify picking him in any position when he spent equal time in all three positions? So I feel like that factor comes into it as well. Last year they went with two pure wingmen in Dacos and I think, did Gordon make it last year as well? There was someone else out on the other wing.
I
I
have a
know, but
someone else. Oh, it could have
I
been
know
Gordon, actually.
it
Let
was
me have a
Josh
quick
Dacos
look.
was on one wing, and there was
Yeah,
another wingman. There was another pure wingman out on the other one,
it could have been.
which
It
is
could have been Gordon.
which was the first time they did that in a long time. So look, it's
Yeah, it
probably
was.
not ideal.
It was Goulden. So last year, I'm just going to
They
read
had
out the midfield. So Goulden was on a wing. Bontempelli exactly the same spot as he is now. So yeah, centre. Dacos on the other wing.
yeah, that's
Obviously, Nick
Josh.
Dacos. It's funny how his brother's now there. Tim English was a
Yeah,
ruck. Fair enough. He's probably had a worse off season than gone. Zach Butters, which I wouldn't be surprised he gets named in this side as well. He was named as a follower. So obviously, Paddy Cripps was in there. And Nick Dacos, obviously now named on a wing, he was the other follower. So yeah, pretty similar. But it's nice to see Gordon being rewarded 2 years in a row, considering he hasn't probably had as great of a season, especially if you're looking at statistics like Super Coach. But yeah, it's good to see more and more. And obviously, it's obviously correlates to wingers doing, of these two in particular, doing so well in Dacos and Goulden. But Goulden in particular, it's nice to see him being rewarded as a true wingman rather than a pure midfielder being in that same position and getting it over a true wingman. And probably one that's been super, super harshly not chosen in a couple of years now is Hugh McGluggage. He's probably the other one that is a true winger and plays that wing role to perfection that probably doesn't get the recognition that he deserves. Maybe simply because probably the amount of possessions he doesn't accumulate as much as, say, Gordon does. And he plays in a team which has Dunkley and Neil, which makes it harder. We gonna
yep,
add
I
anything?
would go along with that. No,
We gonna add anything onto that? Or not? Not really.
have I got anything on tonight?
Yeah. Oh no,
No.
as in. Oh yeah, yeah. Nah. I think the other thing I was going to mention was, and you touched on this, Nathan, was D'Ambrosio. He's probably come from the clouds with not being in even that best 22 for the Hawks early days, and it was frustrating as a super coach pick. That's for sure that he wasn't recognised or wasn't scoring as well as he could, and then all of a sudden he just seems to score tons for fun, really, on a wing position. And it's interesting. It was almost a good correlation with him scoring well in comparison when Day was in the side and when Day wasn't in the side. I don't know if that was just relation or not, but he's one that will definitely be a nice watch to watch in the final series, coming through, and see if he can continue that run moving into the final series, because he's been so important for them on that wing. He's owned that wing and obviously gotten recognition from the AFL to be in that squad. Obviously not in the 22, but yeah, definitely recognition for someone who was on the outer in both clubs he was in previously as well. But what are your thoughts? Apologies, my cough. I've had this shitty one not all day. But what are your thoughts on that half forward line? Do you reckon we've got it in the bank, or do you reckon we start to see maybe like the likes of Merritt O'Neill come into that zone now, considering that they haven't been named in the midfield?
No, I think I'm pretty happy with that. I think
Yeah,
I'm pretty happy with our half forward line. I feel like the half forward line has sort of become the home of where they place the midfielders who kick a lot of goals or do spend time forward. So
yeah,
like Heaney, like Butters, like Jason Horn-Francis when he eventually makes this team as well. I feel like that's where they're going to get put on the half forward line, just purely because there's probably better pure midfielders than them, but because they can impact the scoreboard, um, that's probably the best spot for them. So I would put my house on Heaney being named on that half forward line. Um, and if Butters is going to get named as well, he's probably going to get named on the half forward line as well. So
yeah,
it just leaves that centre half forward position. I still think Jeremy Cameron's going to make the side. I still think he's going to be the centre half forward, and Jesse Hogan will be the full forward.
you're saying
That's just.
Colonel out, or
I think Kerno will miss out. I think Cameron's had a better year than Kerno.
yeah,
So I still feel like the half forward line will be. I know we've got Hogan there, but I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe when we did this, we didn't have the option to pick Jeremy Cameron, which I was very surprised at because he would have been the first pick key forward that I would have gone with, and then Hogan would have been second. So yeah, so I think the half forward line myself will be Heaney, Cameron, and Butters.
yeah,
But time will tell on that. And then I think I'm happy with the forward three. I think Daniels will get there. I think Moore or Stengel will get there. It'll be one of those two. And then I think Hogan will go in the full forward. That's my guess on the forward line.
Well, they've just announced it now. Do you want to guess who they chose?
Well,
Because
did they
you
choose
now,
Heaney?
I'll tell you now. I'm just going to tell you what 3 out of 6 correct.
Heaney,
Yep.
Butters,
No.
Hogan,
Yep.
Kerno.
No.
Did they Brett Daniels?
No. Dylan
Oh,
Moore
so
was
they
the
went with
last.
Dylan Moore. Did they name Jeremy Cameron?
Yeah, they did. You were right.
I told you.
Just as you were talking about it, they announced him as centre half
I,
forward.
and Hogan was a full forward.
Yeah. Nailed
I
that on the
told
head.
you Jeremy Cameron would make the team.
Yeah, you
That's why I
def
was so surprised when he wasn't on there because I thought he was the best forward of the year, Jeremy Cameron.
yeah,
So I will say this though that we did get 4 out of 6 because we couldn't actually pick Jeremy Cameron, and if we had the ability to pick Jeremy Cameron, I think I would have talked you into picking him over Kerno.
yeah,
So I'm going to take Cameron for that and say we got 4 out of 6 there. Because we didn't actually have the option to pick Jeremy Cameron. So I'm going to take that. So 4 out of 6 isn't too bad there.
yeah, fair enough. What are your thoughts on, as I said, I guess we look here to the ones that missed out. Butters, I guess, is one player. I have a feeling this midfield line is going to be stacked with midfielders. Just looking at it now, with Butters, Merritt, and Neil in particular not being named
You
yet.
mean the interchange bench?
Yeah. Mid-change bench. What are your thoughts on only selecting one small forward for now? There could be one on the bench as well, but Waterman, do you reckon that was a bit of a surprise, especially from a West Coast side that struggled to win any games?
No, I think he's in the Harry Cheadle basket. Waterman. Good year, really good year, but unfortunately, because he played for a bottom side, his I guess games don't get looked at as much as what say a Cameron would, whose side finished in the top four, and also Hogan, whose side finished in the top four as well. So I guess you got to do a balancing act somewhere. So yeah, I feel like that not many people are going to have any arguments about Cameron and Hogan being in the side.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100% agree in that regards. Yeah, I think having the three tall forwards there, all well deserved in that scenario. I was when Nathan comes back, I'll have a discussion about Chad Warner. I guess just having my quick thoughts with regards to Warner. He's one that you nailed on the head, Nath, with regards to nailing him as a high half forward position. Chad Warner, I guess he probably had his games or moments throughout the season where he didn't quite put his game together, but I think I want to get your opinion on this, Nathan. Do you reckon Warner is their most important midfielder, or do you reckon Heaney's their most important midfielder? The reason I say that is if we look at the Sydney games in total, Heaney probably plays more up forward anyway as a true centre or a true high half forward, or do you reckon if we put it like this, if opposition teams start to negate Warner and start to put pressure on him, the Sydney Swans fall apart as a whole. How important do you think Warner's to that lineup, considering he's now got recognition for it as well?
Can we just go back one step? So who else got named on the forward line other than those three that we missed out on?
It was so Heaney on a flank, Warner on a flank, Cameron centre half forward, full forward Hogan, forward pockets Waterman and Moore.
Oh, Waterman got named, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
Yeah. So he was one instead of Daniels for us.
Yeah, good on him. I still probably wouldn't have done that, because he's not a small forward. But that's another discussion point. As for Chad Warner, well, I think it's fitting that the three Sydney boys made it. Given the fact that I think they've been involved in about 65% of Sydney's entire scores this year. So they're clearly the best 1, 2, 3 punch in the AFL this season by a long way. Again, I think the one that was most likely to miss probably was Warner. But at the end of the day, I am kind of happy that Warner did get in, because I think he was probably the he was probably the one at the start of the year with Heaney that really ignited them. And once Heaney sort of started dropping away and Warner sort of dropped off as well, and then sort of towards the end of the year, Warner's picked up again, and Heaney sort of has come back, but not quite as much. So, yeah, I'm in some ways I'm glad that Warner made it, because I think he definitely did deserve it.
Yeah, I think come Saturday Arvo when they play, or Saturday week, sorry, when they do play the Giants, I think the likes of Heaney, Goulden, Warner are going to be super, super important for that Sydney side doing some damage, considering how talented the GWS midfielders are as well. But I think you've also got to give credit where credit's due with, as much as Sydney kind of fell off a cliff a little bit in that last month of footy and question marks started getting raised, it's probably reminiscent, or not reminiscent, it's probably it's rewarding to see those three Sydney midfielders doing so well and getting recognised for it, because without them, Sydney aren't a top four side as much as you'd like to say, I think. Just looking at Moore having an interview now, I think Dylan Moore is also one that should definitely be getting recognition as well. Nathan can probably argue as well. He's probably the most underrated forward going around. I think watching him live, having not owned him in Supercoach, he's definitely been a frustrating season because he's had those games where he's gone 160 plus and whatnot. But he's one that I think is very criminally underrated as a small forward. He's one of those small forwards that can really push into the midfield and cause damage. You look at other small forwards and they just stay. They're a standalone small forward. They're there to kick goals. Dylan Moore is basically playing a high half forward, small forward role, providing that manic pressure, but also being able to play midfield minutes as well and rotate the centre bounce rotations to good effect as well. So it's one of those things where you look at it and it's nice to see him getting recognition, but I could only imagine that he's gotten that accolade because Hawks have done so well. What are your thoughts, Nathan, on Dylan Moore? And do you reckon if the Hawks weren't... Sorry, my cough's really bad at the moment.
That's all right.
If the Hawks didn't make the finals, that he wouldn't get that accolade?
Yes, he's criminally underrated. I've had him in Supercoach draft for the second half of the year, and he is an amazingly underrated player. He just goes in week out, and gets the job done. To answer your other question, yes, if Hawthorn were not in the finals, he probably isn't in this position. So, that's just who he is, though. He's just a quiet achiever. He just racks up his 25 disposals, kicks a couple of goals every week. Has 6 or 7 score involvements a game. But you know what you're gonna get from him week in, week out. He's pretty consistent as well. So I am glad that he's finally being recognised. But yes, he's very criminally underrated.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think he'll play a pivotal role in the game next week. I think, as we'll touch base with our finals preview next week, I think Moore's going to play a super, super important role, especially with the Dogs' defense. They're very iffy in that half-back, full-back position. They don't have the best defense going around. I think Dylan Moore is a player that can 100% expose those Dogs' small forwards. I don't really have a lockdown or a player that can do a good role in a small forward, and I can see Moore exposing that to great effect come Friday night. But before we wrap it up, I know this stream's gone on for a while, and we appreciate those of you who've popped in and said hello. But interchange bench, I'm hoping they'll announce in the next 5 minutes because this is getting lengthy, as it always is with the All-Australian selection. But is there any players there that haven't been named that you think won't get it in? We've obviously got 4 spots to fill. I think my first question is, do you think Tristan Xerri makes it and they play 2 rucks, or do you think it's literally just going to be all the other midfielders that didn't make the midfield spots?
No, I don't think Tristan Xerri will make it. I think there's only enough spots for 1 ruckman this year, which I think was Max Gorm, wasn't it?
Yeah, Maxi Gorn's in it now, yeah.
Yeah, so he was the one that I was big on. I think you were sort of a little bit wavering on him, but I was convinced he'd make it. So I'm glad I talked you into him. No, I think, unfortunately, I think one of Daniels or Stengel are going to miss out. I don't think they're going to, one of those, or maybe even both of them are going to miss out. Because I feel like that Treloar has to make it because I don't think you can have the most disposals in the AFL and not make it. I suppose he can, but it'd be a bit of a quirky one, if you will. Lockie Neal, I think, has to make it. So there's 2 bench spots already.
Yeah.
You've still got Butters and Merritt and Daniels and Stengel, and whatnot. So, I think Daniels and or Stengel both aren't going to make it, which I know you were really big on Brent Daniels, and the stats would probably back you up there and say he deserves to make it, because I think he is the number 1 small forward in the All-Australian champion data team. Yes, he is. He's the number 1 small forward. Look, at the end of the day, there's always unlucky players who make the final 40 that perhaps don't make the final 22. But Unfortunately, that's just a part of a process of eliminating um, 40 players into 22 or 23, whatever they do. So if it's 23, there might be a spot there for one of them, but if it's only 22, it's probably going to be hard to make a case.
Yeah, well, they're just announcing the interchange bench now. You'll be happy with one player that's been announced there, but I'll let you have a guess about who the four are because we've nailed on that bench, as in as is on the bench now without them being removed. So don't worry about players being swapped in and out. But on the bench that we've listed on the screen, we've nailed one out of the four. Obviously, some players have moved from other positions into that bench. But what do you think the last four is?
Well, I'm hoping Adam Trelaw's one of them.
Bingo. Yeah, it was the second named, which I think is going to make you quite happy.
Good, well deserved. I think Lockie Neal's probably on there as well.
Bingo. He's just on screen now on the broadcast. He's been listed there as well. I guess well deserved for sure.
Zach Butters, did he get named?
Yes, unless I've been mistaken. Yep, Butters was late listed as the last spot.
How many
And
are
who?
on the bench? Is it 3 or 4? I mean, is it 4 or
Four.
5?
Four.
Um, did they go with one of the small forwards?
No, no small forward.
So it's another midfielder.
No, it was defender.
Oh, not Sheasel.
No.
Is this the one I'll be very happy about, or is that Trelaw?
I think Trelaw you were happy with. He was listed in our defensive line.
Oh, Whitfield.
Yeah, Lockie Whitfield got announced.
Well, we got 4 of them. We got them in our side, just not on the bench. So, I'm gonna blame Thomas for Daniels, and I'll take the blame. I'll take the blame for Stengel.
Yeah.
Because I think other than that, we basically got every other player in the squad. So I don't think we did too bad in the end. But all the Essendon fans will be up in arms about Zach Merritt missing out.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's a stiff one for sure.
Which, if they had a 5th spot on the bench, perhaps he would be the 5th player that they went for.
Yeah.
But I guess unfortunately that's what happens when when you don't make the finals. And you've got players like Neil and Whitfield who make the finals, and Trelaw, and Butters, who are all basically in top 6 sides. That they probably do deserve it more than Butters, than someone who doesn't make the finals. So, yeah, I'm again the Zach Merritt one. I think you were big on Merritt. I wasn't as big on Merritt. I think I just ended up going along with you on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like overall to get basically the entire squad.
Yeah.
Other than a few, other than what do we miss out on? Stengel, Daniels, and Merritt, and
Yeah.
Sheasel.
Yeah, that's
And
four, yeah.
Andrews. So I missed
Yeah.
out. What did we miss out on? 1, 2.
5, I
What
think.
did we miss out on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To miss out on 5 of them, and to get what do we get? 17 of them, I think is a really, really good result. Obviously that's counting Cameron there instead of
Yeah.
Charlie Curnow as well, because we couldn't pick Jeremy Cameron in our draft thing that we did. I mean, in our All Australian thing we did. So he would have obviously been in the spot where Curnow is now.
Yeah.
But yeah, to nail 17 of the 22, I think is really, really good on our behalf. It's obviously not the full 22, but there were a few, 50-50 ones who he tossed up, and most of them ended up making it. So yeah, overall, I think we did really well to get 17 of them, considering the
Yeah.
fact that people like Merritt and Daniels both missed out,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people would have had Merritt in their side as well. So,
100%.
yeah, I think we did really well.
Yeah, I'd be surprised, or would be not surprised, intrigued more so to see how Merritt polls up in the Brownlow, because if he comes top 5, questions must be asked about why he wasn't in the All Australian side. I think, you bring up a valid point with the finals and whatnot in Essendon falling off a cliff essentially after after halfway through the season. But yeah, questions have to be asked. I think, in particular with Merritt, to see why he wasn't selected. I'm very surprised there. I just
Well,
don't understand where. I mean, I know, okay, I do understand that other midfielders are more equally as deserving. Trelaw, you raised the point about equal, just record disposals, whatnot. Sarong picks for himself. Neil picks for himself. I guess there's only so many mids you can pick there, but I'd argue if you're putting it down on paper, probably Merritt goes ahead of Warner. Is probably one I'd take the swap out of straight away.
Well, we did. I think we did have that same discussion as well. I think from memory, I think we did have that same discussion with Merritt and Warner, and I think we went with Merritt.
Yeah,
We'll have to watch back on the last episode, but I feel like I do remember having that discussion about about
yeah,
Warner,
yeah, 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 yeah.
um, and where he would end up on the side. I think I perhaps did flag he may end up out on the wing, where Merritt was, but I thought Merritt had a good year as well. But yeah, I actually wouldn't be surprised if Merritt does poll well in the Brownlow because I don't know who's going to take votes off him at Essendon,
Yeah.
other than Nick Munn and maybe Andy McGrath to some extent. So um, I guess that's where it comes in as well. But he'd probably be the shortest price of any player from any club to be leading their Brownlow medal count, except perhaps Harry Sheasel at North Melbourne,
Yeah.
or Nick Dacos at Collingwood. But yeah, again, outstanding year for Merritt. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's probably hard to justify picking a non-finalist when you've got, when you've got Neil and Trelaw and Whitfield and who's the other one? Butters.
But yeah,
When they're all playing in finals, and three of the four are playing in qualifying finals,
yeah,
it's pretty hard to justify that. Picking someone outside the finals for that, but yeah, that's
yeah. No, 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, just whilst you were talking, I was just having a flick through social media or Twitter in particular to see kind of the initial reaction. It seems a bit of an uproar, as it does every year with regards to certain players missing out. I guess Kerno is another big talking point we kind of grazed upon with regards to him missing out being the second highest goal kicker. Should he have gotten a position ahead of Waterman? Is another question to be answered, but we'll probably leave it at that before I die of a cough because this cough is getting seriously out of hand.
yeah.
I haven't been able to get water out of me. But really appreciate those of you who have rocked up to the stream. I know it's been a bit of a lengthy one, but I know with how the All Australian gets selected, it's usually quite late in the evening. So hopefully you enjoyed different points discussion with regards to trades and our thoughts on the All Australian side as well. Next week we'll be doing a deep dive into the first week of AFL finals. It'd definitely be interesting to see who Nathan targets in his nags next week, considering all he's got to run off is an All Australian side selection. But yeah, hopefully you enjoy the week off from footy. Be a nice bit of a breather before the hectic chaos starts from week one of finals, and it will definitely be interesting to see who progresses through to either a prelim final or another semi-final. So other than that, we'll catch you next week we'll record on Monday, but we should be out on Tuesday for our finals preview.